So in this video, we're going to talk about how you might use an interview. And I've had a lot of students use interviews for similar projects to the one you're doing right now very successfully. So this is absolutely an option that's available. It doesn't require a whole lot of finding resources, but it does require some connection making. So for this one, let's imagine we have a freshman student, Justin, and he's noticed that he gets confused by his teacher's comments and doesn't even really know where to start asking questions about them when he gets feedback on his papers. And he's also noticed that some of his friends seem to feel the same way. But he's also noticed that even though the teachers may have never met each other, they're leaving some very similar comments, and the points of confusion are similar, even when they're in a different department or something. So this leads him to develop a research question where he asks, what are the differences in how students understand instructor feedback and how instructors intend that feedback to be read? And so Justin says, okay, how am I going to find this out? So there's a lot of ethical concerns here. For instance, like we talked about in other videos, remember that grades and instructor feedback are private information. And so they're protected information. So you can't just collect people's grades and, that's not a thing that's acceptable. So how's he going to handle this? So one thing he thinks he can do is just talk to people and have them volunteer the information. And he's not going to ask about grades, not specifically. He's going to ask about their impressions. And so that's not going to actually violate anyone's privacy. And it gives the respondents a chance to choose how much information they're going to give him. So with this, he can get a lot of detail from each person. So he decides to design his interviews a little like a survey in that he's going to ask similar questions of people in similar roles. And so when you do a survey, what's really important, or when you do an interview, what's really important is that you prepare for that interview. You should know what you need to know about the person. So you should know in what capacity are you choosing that person as a person to interview. Why do you consider them an expert? You should know something about readily available information about that person in that role. So you don't, for instance, if you're a journalist or something and you're interviewing an author about their latest book, you don't start with the question of, so are you an author? No, you do research and you know what books they put out before and so on and so forth. So what Justin's going to do in this case is he decides he's going to ask a couple of instructors about how they feel that students should be understanding their comments. And then he's going to ask a couple of students how they feel that instructors should be designing their comments, or how they feel that comments have been confusing or helpful. So he comes up with a bunch of questions. For the instructors, his first question is, what order do you intend for students to read your comments when you comment on their paper? And so he's like, how do you want them to read it? Number two, he says, what abbreviations do you use when you write comments? So that's one of the things he's interested in, is where are the possible points of confusion? Number three, he says, what kind of instruction do you provide in class to help students understand your feedback? That is, do you talk to your students about how to read feedback? And number four, he says, do you see your feedback being related to the grades? So how do you see your feedback being related to the grades? Number five, do you give the students a chance to revise after you've given feedback? So can they respond to that feedback? And then he says, for number six, how long does it usually take you to grade an individual student's paper? How much energy do you spend putting that feedback on that paper? And number seven, he says, what do you wish students would understand when they see your comments? Notice that how these questions are phrased, they're all open-ended. None of them are yes or no questions. Yes or no questions are just not productive in interviews most of the time. unless you immediately follow them up with a follow-up question. Notice also how these questions are questions that only the respondent can answer. So a lot of them are about their personal experience, but also they are focused on the respondent's role and experience. And notice, so now let's look at the student questions that Justin's got, and notice how they're similar to the ones that he's designed for the instructor. So 1, have you ever felt confused about an instructor's comment? So yeah, that's a yes or no question, but then he follows it up with, why did you feel confused? Or why haven't you ever felt confused? And then number 2, when you get a paper back, what do you first do to read, or what do you first read in the feedback? And then what do you do? So now he's asking about process. And then number 3, he says, what helps you to understand instructor feedback? So now he's asking, what do you think would be most helpful? Number 4, what is the relationship between written feedback and your grades, do you think? So he puts this in a kind of casual way because he'll be talking amongst peers, but also notice that this is related to the question to the instructors of, how do you think your feedback and the grades are related? So we can compare these answers. So he's comparing something that actually is related. Number 5, do you often revise when you get the chance to do so? If so, how do the comments factor into those revisions? So now he's again following up on what he's asking the instructors about, do they give the chance to revise? And now he wants to know, if that chance is given, is it a useful thing? Number 6, how long do you usually spend reading the feedback on the assignment? So now he wants to know the relationship between how long an instructor spends writing the feedback and how long the student spends processing that feedback, and see if someone's wasting their time, or if there isn't enough time being spent somewhere or something, if there's a discrepancy there. Number 7, what do you wish teachers would understand when they write feedback? So this is where, he's really looking for personal opinion, something you can only get out of an interview. So notice how they're really parallel concepts. And when he prepares his questions, he's very carefully preparing the questions for, what kind of an answer am I looking for? And what is the purpose of this question? And when he finishes his interviews, he can then compare those similar questions and get something really useful as an observation out of that. So for this method, Justin doesn't need a whole lot of interviews. This would be a really effective study if he just got 2 teachers and like 3 students, because he's looking at the amount of material he gets from each one rather than getting that big picture. He's trying to get that granular, microscopic, what's really going on here. And so it's okay for him to have fewer informants because he's got more information from each informant. So that's how interviews can be designed as a research project. So it's something you might consider.